Hello, we have an important show for you tonight. Before we begin, a trigger warning. We will be talking about the murder of 13-year-old Madeline Soto. Madeline Soto disappeared in February 2024. She was found March 1st, 2024. Her body was found. She had been murdered by her mother's boyfriend, Stephen Stearns. Stephen Stearns took a plea deal and he was sentenced to a life without the possibility of parole for both raping 13-year-old Madeline as well as murdering 13-year-old Madeline Soto on July 21st, 2025, just less than a month ago. It's something that John and I were following and have been following and have wanted to cover the sentencing. I think that many understand the trigger warning now that I've shared what this is going to be about, but John is going to go back. Dr. John Matthias is a criminal psychologist as well as a clinical psychologist. We have been covering this case. One thing John does is assess offenders, and you plan to talk in depth about not just the sentencing and Stephen Stearns' statement, but to revisit some of what we discussed early on when we discussed this in September of 2024, I believe, or when we first started talking about the murder of Madeline Soto. So to catch everyone up before we jump in, just again want everyone to understand that Stephen Stearns was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And he was initially arrested in 2024 after investigators discovered disturbing videos and images on his phone depicting him assaulting Soto. Investigators believe that the abuse began in 2019 when Madeline was only 8 years old. Stearns faced 60 charges related to abuse, and that was brought against him on March 12th, 2024. He had a trial set just for the abuse that Madeline suffered, not the murder. And right before that trial was to begin, he took a plea deal and now again has been sentenced for both the assaults, the abuse, as well as her murder. The sentencing was heartbreaking. Stephen Stearns made a brief statement. Madeline's biological father also made a statement, as did many others. And we plan to talk about it today to also remind people of our coverage. We have an interview with Stephen Stearns' parents, the parents of the murderer who has now been sentenced. And that is how one of the many things we did in covering this case. So, Dr. John, my co-host, I will give the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to examine Stephen Stearns' statement at sentencing, because I think it even though it's very short, I think it does reveal a significant amount about the criminal mind. And I think that's one of our jobs here is to tell a story, to investigate and tell a story about a crime, but then to analyze it deeper, to find what's hidden in that story, and specifically what's hidden about the criminal mind. And so there's a lot here that's hidden still, by the way. So in the sense that there's a lot about Brian Kohberger, that we don't know because Kohberger didn't go to trial and we didn't see evidence. Same thing is true here. I think there's a lot about Stephen Stearns that we don't know. And I'll speculate a little bit about what I believe happened and how we got to this point. And I think hopefully I'll be in the ballpark, but I don't know for sure since we didn't see all the evidence at trial. But I want to set the tone with some research. I usually don't do that. I usually like to lead with something a little more dramatic from a case, but I'm gonna refer to an article here that's a very well-known article in forensic psychology related to risk factors for sex offenders. And The title of this article, this is a 2010 article. It's by Mann, Hansen, and Thornton. For those who do work with sex offenders, they'll recognize Carl Hansen as one of the pioneers in sex offender research. He's Canadian. He's an amazing researcher. He's done so much to advance knowledge in the field. We're all, those of us who do this day in and day out, we're very grateful to Carl Hansen for all his work. But this article is a phenomenal article because it actually looks across a number of studies, and its goal is to find psychologically meaningful risk factors. So the title of the article is Assessing Risk for Sexual Recidivism, Some Proposals on the Nature of Psychologically Meaningful Risk Factors. Now, the reason I want to start with this is because I'm going to point out, because it's going to guide us for the rest of our analysis here. I want to point out the number one risk factor for sexual recidivism among sex offenders. And
recidivism, I just want to say recidivism is the can you explain what recidivism is?
Recidivism is, so when you commit a crime, or when a crime is committed, for example, with my job, for example, a crime is committed, and then part of my job is to go in and evaluate an offender. It could be a violent offender, sex offender, and then to make some determination of future risk. Future risk is called recidivism. Recidivism is when you reoffend. It's when you commit a crime again. And so a big part of my job is making determinations about whether someone will recidivate or whether they'll commit a crime again in the future. And the reason that's important, obviously, is because the courts, prior to sentencing, are trying to determine if someone can be placed safely in the community. And the only way to determine that is to determine the risk. Is this person going to be a high risk to reoffend or low risk? And obviously, the lower the risk, the higher the probability is that defense counsel for an offender, for example, might be able to get a placement in the community or probation. Ideally, defense attorneys want the most lenient sentence for their clients, right? So that their ultimate goal is probation. Well, I guess their ultimate goal is acquittal or dismissing all the charges. But short of that, if there is a conviction or a plea deal, their goal, the way they see it, is to assist their clients in the best way possible. And the best possible situation for most clients would be probation or parole. So recidivism is the risk of reoffending. And so this research article looks at a lot of the more important than risk alone, it looks at the psychologically meaning risk factors. So in assessing risk, there's two types of risk factors. There's static factors and there's dynamic factors, dynamic risk factors. Static factors are variables like age. They don't change, right? You can't change your age. You can go to treatment all you want, but you can't change your age. So that's static.
Right.
A dynamic risk factor would be something like substance abuse. Substance abuse, if you have an addiction or a substance abuse problem, you can change it. You can stop. So it's dynamic. It's fluid. It can be changed. What hasn't really been, until this article, there wasn't a lot of examination of psychologically meaningful risk factors. In other words, what are some of those psychological elements that contribute to recidivism? And the reason this is important, because I'm going to point out the most important risk factor, the risk factor that has the highest probability of recidivism from this study, and I'm going to report that right now.
Okay.
That element is emotional congruence with children. So if you're an offender, specifically a sex offender, and you show emotional congruence with children, meaning that what that means is congruence obviously means affinity or closeness. Now you can have you can have a close relationship with a child, but this goes beyond that. This gets into essentially feeling more comfortable with children than adults. That you have an emotional bond with children that you do not have with adults. And if you have that, if I'm assessing a sex offender that has no history of significant or meaningful relationship with adults, and then they have some sexual offenses with children, and they have some history of close relationships with children, let's say nieces and nephews and families or whatever, right? Like, that's a problem, because it shows me that this risk factor, emotional congruence with children, is at work. It's in play. And if I know that, it's very, very difficult to get someone to change that. That if your primary emotional bond and emotional security is with children and not adults, it's difficult to change that. And so that's why it's such a significant risk factor. Because when you have that, your risk for reoffense goes up dramatically. And of course, I mean, it's a risk factor for offense in general. Also, these also play into, these are also risk factors for committing offenses. So not just recidivism, but also prior to the commission of a crime.
A quick word from our sponsor. You know that moment when you've been tugging at your bra all day and you think, why do I do this to myself? That used to be me until I found Honey Love. Admittedly, I had heard about them, but I was skeptical. No underwire and still supportive? Yeah, right. But I tried their Cloud Embrace bra and now I get it. It's wireless. It's got these lightly padded foam cups that feel like a cloud, and it actually lifts and supports. No digging, no adjusting, no matter your size. It just works. And their shapewear, listen, it is the first shapewear I've worn that doesn't roll down when I move. It has this targeted compression that smooths and shapes without making you feel like you can't breathe. Genius. Treat yourself to the most advanced bras and shapewear on the market. Save 20% off Honey Love with our exclusive link, honeylove.com/hidden. That's honeylove.com/hidden to find your perfect fit and get 20% off. After you purchase, they'll ask where you heard about them. Tell them we sent you, and you help support our show. Treat yourself to the most advanced bras and shapewear on the market. Save 20% off Honey Love at honeylove.com/hidden. Honey Love, the new standard in bras and shapewear. Is this I guess emotional congruency it's not necessarily, are you saying that could lead to pedophilia? It's not pedophilia.
Well, I think the implication is that it's correlated with pedophilia.
Okay.
It's correlated with, you can have, I guess you can, I mean, it's slightly complicated in the sense that you can have a closer emotional bond to children and feel safer to children and perhaps not have any type of sexual attraction to children.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
And so in that sense, if you're capable of having a normal adult relationship, then it may not present a problem. Although it's peculiar, right? Because it suggests that whatever adults bring to the table, or the complexity of adult relationships, you may struggle with that because you find children easier to relate to. You find children safer to be around. And so oftentimes there's going to be a correlation. If that's the case, it's going to often occur hand in hand with an attraction or a sexual attraction to children as well. If you feel safe with children and you don't feel safe with adults, then in many ways you're going to feel safer sexually with children too. So the two often go hand in hand. And obviously that's the problem.
Okay.
There can be some differences. I think it's important to note too that in pedophilia, there's different types of pedophilia. There's the exclusive type, which is essentially an exclusive attraction to children. So pedophilia would be an attraction to children 13 and under. And exclusive pedophilia is strictly an interest in children. And then there's the non-exclusive type, which is you have an attraction to children and you have an attraction to adults potentially, or you're at least capable of negotiating relationships with children and relationships with adults. Your primary attraction may be to children, but you're still capable of some type of sexual attraction or maybe engaging in sexual activity with an adult if you're non-exclusive type. Now, Stephen Stearns is interesting. It's an interesting case because it's not clear whether he's exclusive or non-exclusive. I mean, he was obviously in a relationship with Jen Soto, Madeline's mother, and he had other adult relationships, but some of those adult relationships were strange, right? In fact, we didn't talk to her, but we saw some statement. There were some interviews with one of his exes. One of his exes is named Marilee Alejandro. She's an ex-girlfriend, apparently, and she told an interviewer that Stefan often didn't spend nights with her because he wanted to be with Madeline, and he wanted to be with Madeline because according to him, he put it on Madeline. He said Madeline could not sleep without him. She also said, and this is interesting, we're going to come back to this, Marilee Alejandro said that oftentimes he could not become aroused around her. And the only way he became aroused around her, an adult, was if when he asked, are you ready for this? We talked about this before, but here we go again. The only way he could become aroused around her was if he asked her to lay down dead. If she played dead, then he would become aroused. And then this is going to be an important part of the story, by the way. So for those who listened to our earlier Stearns shows, we did discuss this, but we're going to revisit some of this because all of this is going to be relevant in terms of understanding Stephen Stearns. So there's a question here. I mean, I can't even, I wouldn't diagnose him as a pedophile, by the way. I just don't have enough information. It certainly seems like that would be a reasonable diagnosis, but there were a lot of images of him with Madeline. There were a lot of, inappropriate,
to say the least.
A lot, right? So I mean, even without the murder here, he was going to go away for a long time, just based on what they had. And as you pointed out, initially the trial wasn't even for the murder. And they could probably get at least 20 to 40 years, maybe life, without the murder. So clearly this is someone who pushed a lot of boundaries before the murder. So it's not totally clear whether he was an exclusive pedophile or not. It seems like, based on the fact that he had some adult relationships, that perhaps he was non-exclusive, but there were other elements in play here. There were paraphilias. We talked about that before too. Paraphilias are paraphilias is basically a condition characterized by abnormal sexual desires that can cause distress, and often they cause harm to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, pedophilia would be one of those. For some pedophiles, it does cause distress. For some, it doesn't. I think in broadest terms, a paraphilia would be defined as sexual deviancy. So abnormal sexual desires and behaviors and fantasies that typically kind of cross a line in terms of laws, legality, and in terms of societal norms. Again, pedophilia would be an example of that. I think clearly, to me, there's a lot of paraphilias going on here, but I want to start with this idea of emotional congruence with children, because that's really going to set the tone for understanding the sentencing.
Okay.
So let's, if we could, let's start with Madeline's biological father. He gave a statement. It's fairly short,
Okay.
but I think it's going to be important to play Madeline's father first, because I want to contrast that with what Stephen Stearns is going to say later, just in terms of tone, in terms of attitude. There's just so many differences between these two.
My name is Tyler Wallace.
Tatiana Wallace.
And Tyler, what's your relationship to Madeline Soto?
Madeline Soto was my daughter.
Go ahead.
Madeline Soto was my daughter. She was happiness. She was a joy to be around. She was quirky and intelligent. She was curious. A little forgetful like me too. That happens sometimes, but I just loved her so much. And I was not able to be in her life as much as I would like to, due to circumstances and choices I had made, due to the way finances worked. I was strained in my relationship with my daughter, and that was finally getting better. The last time I saw her was in October of 2023, and she had come to visit for a few days. And when I took her back to the airport, I said, you're turning 13 soon. When you turn 13, you have a choice of which guardian you're interested in staying with. Would you like to stay with me and Tati? And she said yes, that she would. And so I was this close to having my little girl, sir. Because of the actions of this depraved man, I will never meet the woman she was becoming. And I can't grasp it. I can't grasp the selfishness of you, the deplorability of your actions. You're depraved. You're weak. You're a coward. You're a sneak thief. You crept into a family and took advantage and exploited them when they were weak. It's torn my family apart. It's led to arguments about who can go where and who can get what and who can help who, but we're all on edge because it doesn't heal with time. This isn't like other deaths that I've experienced. This just gets worse. It just gets worse every time I rethink about it and the true horror of what this man visited upon her. And I can only hope that he lives a long time in prison and has those same horrors revisited upon him by his fellow inmates. Thank you.
That was the first time I heard that. That was really hard to listen to, especially the revelation that Maddie wanted to come live with him at 13. I think we can surmise why she wanted to come live with him, right? In retrospect, I think it's apparent.
Absolutely. Right.
So in spite of Tyler's problems, there's something he said I want to acknowledge right now in terms of contrasting this with Stephen Stearns, which we're going to do in a minute. But he says he'll never get to know the woman, quote, the woman she was becoming, unquote. Right? And I think that says so much in terms of he acknowledges that Maddie is someone that's growing and maturing and going to become her own unique entity, right? He acknowledges that this is someone that he needs to protect and help to achieve adulthood or reach adulthood successfully. He says so in that little statement about that he'll never get to know the woman she was becoming, it's so important because he recognizes that his job as a parent is to protect her so that she can grow into a future as an adult.
Right.
Right. And that's the very thing we're not going to see with Stephen Stearns. If we go back to this idea that this risk factor, which is emotional congruence with children, you're not going to see that with you're not going to see that with Tyler. what you see with Tyler from that one statement, and just from this little brief snapshot of Tyler, is this desire to take Maddie back when she's 13, to protect her, and to lead her, to help her become the woman that he sees her becoming, to lead her into adulthood, to become this successful, happy, right? He says she's happy, she's quirky. He sees these qualities. He wants to nurture these qualities. He wants to lead her into adulthood and protect her, right? I think that's why that statement was so moving to me and so important, because it's everything that Stephen Stearns does not tell us.
Yeah, it's true.
So having said that, and having looked briefly at Tyler's statement, it's a short statement, but it says a lot. You can read between the lines. Let's move into Stephen Stearns.
Yes, Your Honor, I would like to make a brief statement. I agree that it's not fair that Madeline is not here anymore. I still have a hard time contemplating a world where she's not around, a world which feels less vibrant and less colorful than it did before. I've prayed to God countless times to trade places with her, to take me instead. But unfortunately, that's just not how he works. I have nothing but sorrow for her loss, and I miss her all the time. Her passing has torn me and my family apart as well, and she truly was a joy. I pray to God that she is in heaven and that he's taking good care of her. And I hope she gets to join the choir because she had a beautiful voice. I will miss her all the time. I will never not honor her memory. And I apologize for all the pain.
So he gives us a very brief statement,
Yeah,
but
very brief.
it's more than sufficient to really dig deeper into who this person is and to really kind of look at some aspects of the criminal mind that may not be obvious. If you just listen to it, you think, okay, this is someone who doesn't really seem to be taking responsibility, right? Like
Right.
I listened to some of the talking heads, lawyers, attorneys mainly after the trial talking about it, and they all said one thing. They all said, this is a guy who really didn't take responsibility. He really didn't apologize. There's no remorse. That's all true. But let's dig deeper than them. Since we're hidden, that's our job, right? So let's dig a little deeper than the standard tropes about he didn't take responsibility. Yes, he didn't take responsibility. However, I divided his statements. So we're going to go through every statement. I divided his statements into 4 categories. And each of those categories, I think, will tell us something about Stephen Stearns. Let's start with what I think is the most important category, and that's what I would call the category of emotional congruence with children. Right? Again, that's going to drive our analysis tonight. This is the biggest risk factor for recidivism, for sexual offending against children, emotional congruence with children. Another way to say this, by the way, so it's not just this idea of emotional closeness with children. It's also, it goes beyond that. It's also what I would call romantic.
Yeah,
A romantic connection
absolutely.
to children.
Yeah.
And so my category here is not just emotional congruence with children, but romantic overtones or romantic connection to a child. And let's break down what he said. He says, I'm going to read the 4 statements he made that I think fit this category. He says, quote, I still have a hard time contemplating a world where she is not around, a world that feels less vibrant and colorful than it did before. Okay. So that sounds like somebody who would make that statement is essentially talking about someone who's that it sounds like a romantic relationship, right?
Absolutely.
Like
It does.
less vibrant, less colorful. Like this is someone who misses someone that they were romantically involved with.
I agree.
He then says, quote, I have nothing but sorrow for her loss, and I miss her all the time. Notice again, too, he's not talking past tense here. He's talking present. He's acting like, in some ways, he's acting like he's still in this romantic relationship. And that's how he comes off. That's how he comes across.
Yeah.
Nothing but sorrow for her loss. It's like he lost. And I mean, we're talking about a 13-year-old. So obviously this is depraved, right? But like, he's talking about losing his romantic connection, losing his lover, essentially.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. She truly was a joy. Again, the romantic overtones, emotional congruence. And the final thing he says, I will miss her all the time. I will never not honor her memory. These all fit into this category of emotional congruence with children or romantic overtones. And so I think what's interesting here to me, so again, if we're contrasting this with Tyler, who's interested in Maddie becoming an adult and the journey towards adulthood and getting there safely, Stephen Stearns has no interest in that whatsoever. He's acting like this is a romantic interest that he's lost, and now he's feeling sorrow. And he misses her, right? He's saying all the things you would say if you lost your spouse.
I agree. I agree.
And so that really stood out to me. You know, the first time I heard his speech, I thought, or his sentencing speech, I thought, this is exactly the risk factor that I have to examine every time I do an evaluation with a sex offender. Is there, especially a sex offender that is interested in younger children, is there an emotional congruence with children? Clearly, there's an emotional congruence with children. Does that make Stephen Stearns a pedophile? I mean, I can't diagnose him, but I think it's fair to say that based on the images they found, that this is someone who has an attraction to underage girls at the very least, right? So that's number one. Number two, this idea that he's not taking responsibility that everyone's pointing out. Let's examine that. Let's go a little bit deeper than that, actually. So it's not just taking responsibility. It's also exhibiting what I would call the victim mentality or the victim stance. He opens with this statement. He says, quote, I agree it is unfair that Madeline is not here anymore. I agree that it is unfair. It's unfair because you murdered her, right? Like,
I know that was really a despicable line.
It's unfair. So he's playing the victim. He's saying, and also notice the way he says it. Look at his language. He says, I agree, it is unfair. It is unfair. Not it's unfair because I murdered her. It is vague. It's unfair that Madeline is not, he's not here because of you, right? But somehow he twists this so that he's the victim. It's unfair. I don't get to have my lover anymore. I don't get to have my 13-year-old, right, romantic interest anymore.
Yeah.
So that's this victim stance. So people are talking about this. They're just not unpacking it the way I want to unpack it. So that's number one. Number two, he says, quote, you're going to love this one. Quote, her passing has torn me and my family apart as well.
Victim.
Right. Oh, but not only is it victim, by the way, but you'll note if you go back to Tyler's statement, Tyler says, this has torn the family apart and we don't know how to heal. And then a few minutes later, you have Stephen Stearns saying, her passing has torn me and my family apart as well. Think about that. On the heels of Tyler and his deep sadness and grief over this entire tragedy, you have the murderer basically saying, like, going tit for tat with him. Her passing has torn me and my family apart as well, so shut up, right? Like, what? Talk about insensitive, right? Like, I don't know how you could be more insensitive. He's basically like mocking Tyler in a way. I mean, and so if we're thinking about this in terms of the criminal mind, I mean, this is a good example of not just a lack of remorse and this whole idea of this kind of victim mentality or victim stance, but also this utter callousness and insensitivity to Tyler, to the father.
Yeah.
Like, well, it's torn us apart too. And I mean, and we know, you and I know, we talked to the parents, we've talked to Stefan's parents, and they've had a hard time dealing with this. It has torn them apart. But to say that as part of your sentencing statement after Tyler says it is just, to me, and when he said that, I was like, oh my God, like that's so callous, right? And I talk about this all the time, but callousness as a trait, callousness as a factor in assessing criminals is often correlated highly with psychopathy. So psychopaths, one of the biggest elements or one of the most common elements of a psychopath is callousness. And again, I don't know if Stefan Stearns fits the category of a psychopath, but
Sure.
I will say this is a very callous moment. And we know that there's a tremendous amount of research showing that the biggest predictor of psychopathy in children is this variable of callousness. Children that have no empathy and they're completely callous and indifferent to other children's feelings that stay that way from the time they're very young until they're teenagers or adults, they're at higher risk to become psychopaths than children that aren't callous. So yeah. I thought that was interesting. There's also a category here of things he said that I call spiritual contrition or rationalization. So I think he's using this idea of religiosity or spirituality or spiritual contrition to kind of rationalize away his actions and his behaviors. Let me read you. So I'm actually going to go through everything he said, by the way. I'm just breaking it up by categories.
Okay.
So under this category of spiritual contrition / rationalization, he says, quote, "I've prayed to God to trade places with her, to take me instead. But unfortunately, that's just not how he works."
Oh yeah, that was so, yeah, bad.
Right. I mean, if he really felt that way, then he wouldn't
He's
have
kind of
done
blaming
what he
God
did.
he's kind of blaming God for taking her, not himself. That's how I took that. This has nothing to do with God. This has to do with someone that murdered a child.
Right, exactly. And so in that sense, it's very much a rationalization. It's a way for him to feel better about it. He does that in another line. He says, "I pray to God," this one's worse, I think. Quote, "I pray to God that she is in heaven and that he is taking good care of her. And I hope that she gets to join the choir because she had a beautiful voice," unquote. So again, total rationalization, right? He's saying, if God is taking good care of her and she's in the choir, then maybe my actions weren't so bad, right? Like, he's minimizing it.
Yeah. Imagining
God,
her happy. Sort of like
right.
Lori Vallow in a way, my children are happy in heaven. They're busy.
They're busy. Right. It's Lori Daybell-esque in that sense that this is in some ways making him feel better about what he did. This is minimizing what he did. This is justifying what he did, rationalizing what he did. It's okay because she's in a good place. Right? That's exactly what Lori did in her statement. Well, they're up in heaven with God, and so they're happy and they're fine. So it doesn't matter if I murdered them. It's similar. It's a similar dynamic.
Yeah, it is.
The other element here too, there's a couple other elements here that we talk about oftentimes with criminals. One is from this statement is the utter lack of insight and self-awareness, right? It's what I would call pseudo-religious morality. Like he's using this moral take on this situation again to feel better about himself. And it lacks any type of insight, right? Like it allows him to put his crime at a distance and not take ownership. So you have, this is very typical. It's called mentalization or metacognition, that a lot of criminals just, they lack any insight. They lack self-awareness. They lack this capacity to reflect and to really evaluate their lives. And because of that, they can't evaluate their behaviors and their crimes. They don't have the capacity to step back and reflect on what they're doing. And so that creates more impulsive behaviors. That creates behaviors that are driven more by instinct and by sexual desire in this case, right? Like they're not thinking about what they're doing. They're not thinking about the consequences. They lack that intrinsic capacity to reflect. And so many criminals, we call it mentalization. It's many criminals don't have this capacity for mentalization. And so they're driven by their base instincts, right? They're driven by the wrong elements of, if part of being human, if a big part of being human, maybe the biggest part of human is our capacity for rationality and for thought and for self-reflection and for being conscious and insightful about our actions. Many criminals don't have that. They lack those elements. So you see that here. He's pushing it out on God. He's rationalizing this through God, and he's not only is he not taking responsibility, but he's not showing any insight or self-awareness or any capacity to reflect upon himself and his behaviors. And that kind of related to all of that is this idea of literal, how literal he is, right? We saw this again. You mentioned Lori Daybell. Same thing, right? There's a very literal element to his thought in the sense that he says he hopes that she's in the choir. I mean, I don't want to rule out the possibility that there's not a choir in heaven. I don't know. Who knows, right? But like, it's still being pretty literal. It's still being said, well, she had a beautiful voice, so I hope she's in the choir. I hope God picks her for the choir.
Very literal. Right.
Very literal. Very literal. And we saw this with Lori Daybell, that there's this when you become overly literal and you lose this capacity to engage in abstract thought, again, you really limit your view of the world. You really narrow down your view of the world. Your world becomes so condensed and so narrow and so reductive that you just can't see the forest from the trees, right? All you can see are a few trees. You can't see the forest. And that becomes a problem because you start thinking that all of these little elements in your narrow world are the only elements that make sense. You start placing too much importance on a few of the trees and not the forest. And so it's not hard to imagine that this is one of the ways that he may have fallen in love with Maddie and became involved in this relationship with her, and he lost track of the larger picture. He lost track of the forest, right? And so it's this type of literal thinking, which is closely aligned with what I just said about mentalization and insight and self-reflection. So those two go hand in hand. But you see it here when he talks about the choir specifically. And that leaves one. So I've read every line from his sentencing. There's only one line left. That line is his last line. He says, quote, "I apologize for all the pain," unquote. Obviously, that's a very vague line. It's not real. It's not a real apology. He apologizes for all the pain. Well, does he mean his pain?
Right.
Whose pain? Right? Does he?
His family's pain.
Right.
His hurting and broken up too. Maddie's pain, right? Very vague, very like
What he's not
her
saying,
pain.
what you want someone to say who's genuinely a remorseful or apologetic is to say essentially, I apologize for harming or murdering Maddie and all the pain that my actions caused.
I'm
Right?
sorry for my actions.
Right.
My actions.
So he
Is he
doesn't say that.
apologizing to himself? He could be like, "I'm sorry for your pain." He could be talking to himself.
Yeah, that's what when I first heard it, I thought, oh, he's talking about his pain. He apologizes for all the pain he caused himself by getting caught, I guess, right? Like, I mean, I want to say that embedded in that last statement about apologizing for the pain, I want to say that to him, I guess this is as close maybe as you'll get to an apology for the murder, but I mean, clearly he's not capable of accepting full responsibility when you're making a vague statement like this. So, and again, this would be very true of most criminals, that they really struggle to own up to what they did. They really struggle to, a lot of criminals are in denial. So you know that, because I'll go to the jails and I'll come back and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy said nothing, right? He's completely in denial. I mean, usually after a few hours I'll get people talking, but you see this here. You see the denial, the minimization, the inability to accept responsibility. So this is what I call this is the category I would call his non-apology, or his lack of responsibility, his lack of culpability. So that is my analysis of the Stephen Stern sentencing statement. It's very short, but I think, hopefully people can see that there's a lot. Surprisingly, there's a lot to unpack from just a few statements that he's making, and I think those statements really help shed light on not only the criminal mind but Stephen Stern's.
There was a lot. I agreed. I agree. I did see a lot of that sort of romantic feeling in his sentencing speech as well. And so thank you for breaking it down for me and helping me know that I wasn't alone in feeling that and seeing that, and why that's so startling, and to teach about some emotional congruency. Is that it?
Emotional
With children.
congruence.
Emotional congruence with children.
It's really interesting that again, getting back to this idea that he can't step back. He kind of can't stand back and reflect on this, right? Because he clearly doesn't see how emotionally invested he still is in Maddie. I mean, he probably perceives this as telling the court essentially, I really miss her, right? Like he sees this as he probably perceives this as that people will perceive him as someone who's grieving the loss of someone that was close to him. But of course, knowing what we know and the way he's presenting this is not, this feels like and sounds more like someone who's grieving the loss of a romantic interest, a spouse, a partner, right? I mean, that's how it comes off. And it's, in that sense, it's really hard to listen to, because it's so, there's a big creep factor there, I think.
Yeah. And so in other words, it is good that he will be spending his life behind bars without the possibility of parole, despite being saved, the death penalty.
Yeah.
What is important is that others are protected from him, and that he won't hurt another child.
I think, by the way, there's another piece to this story. I don't want to get into it. People can go listen to our other episodes, I think, if they want more depth on this issue. But I think it's a real question here about, so we know that the cause of death was strangulation. But I think there's a real question here about how premeditated this was.
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even the possibility that I don't want to say it was an accident, because but it seems to me that and I talked about this previously, and by the way, we talked about this recently. I don't know why this is coming up so much in some of our analyses, but we talked about this with Jeffrey Ziz and his murder of Marcia Norman.
Okay.
This paraphilia called somnophilia. There's a
Right.
paraphilia called somnophilia, which is essentially sex with an unconscious person. Often they're
Right.
sleeping or they're drugged, right? Like clearly, and it's closely correlated with necrophilia, by the way. And so this gets it back to the idea I mentioned earlier that Marilee Alejandro, his ex, said that the only time he could get aroused when she played dead. She pretended like she was unconscious, right? And so I wonder, did he need Maddie? Did he need to, was there some type of erotic asphyxiation where he needed to choke her to the point of unconsciousness, right? Like whatever that is, whatever happened, clearly it was high risk. But I think a lot of that, or some of that, was probably driven by, and there's, by the way, there's a number of paraphilias like somnophilia. So this idea of arousal when someone's unconscious. Necrophilia obviously is an extreme example of that, but there's other types of paraphilias around this. There's a paraphilia called objectophilia, which is someone who has a relationship with inanimate objects like a car. Yes, that exists. There's something called agalmatophilia. That's an attraction to dolls or mannequins. There was this movie called Lars and the Real Girl, which is this crazy, fascinating movie about this guy who develops an attraction to a doll, basically, a life-sized kind of sex doll. It's a crazy movie. But these are all related in the sense that you're talking about an extreme form of objectification, an extreme form of dehumanization of another human being. In other words, the fundamental issue with these paraphilias is you're not having a normal reciprocal relationship with another human being, right? You're engaging with someone who's unconscious, or you're engaging with a doll or even a car, right? You're with an object. And you can see how that, it seems to me that Stefan Stearns may have something like this.
I agree.
The idea that his ex said that she had to play dad, right? That's a pretty good clue. This, by the way, is pretty uncommon. Like the fact that we talked about this with Jeffrey Ziz is unusual. And by the way, the person who did an evaluation of Jeffrey Ziz seems to have missed this.
Absolutely.
And the reason they missed it is because it's hard to see, it's hard to find, it's hard to diagnose. But I think you probably have that here. So if we're looking for kind of the underlying motivations or pathology that's driving this crime, I think you probably need to look towards, and by the way, pedophilia is obviously a paraphilia. You need to look towards these types of paraphilias and maybe multiple paraphilias. Oftentimes people that have one paraphilia are more likely to have many of them or multiple. And so this is a case of that. I think you have some primary paraphilias here, but then you probably have other ones, and they're all kind of correlated. So this idea of strangulation fits in almost completely with this picture of trying to render her unconscious in some way. And maybe going too far, or maybe, there's a lot of scenarios. We talked about some of them in our earlier shows that maybe I've speculated that maybe Maddie threatened to disclose the abuse after years. She's turning 13. There's some boys showing some interest in her at school, right? Maybe she's had enough. She's talking about
moving in with her dad.
I'm
going to leave. I'm out of here.
Right, moving in with her dad. Maybe she's going to tell her dad. So does he murder her because she's going to blow the whistle here? Or she's going to disclose the abuse? That could be. it could be jealousy. He's seen her dating other boys, right? They're showing interest in her. Maybe he doesn't want the competition, right? I don't know. It's hard to know. We'll never know. But there's other possibilities, like she started menstruation several months before, right? So maybe, I know this sounds peculiar, but maybe because she's reaching puberty, he's not as interested in her. Maybe he wants to end her life when he's ahead in the game, that he sees her like reaching puberty as presenting a lot of problems. He's not as attracted to someone who's reached puberty. Maybe he got her pregnant, right? I mean, I think they ruled that out. They
They did rule that out.
They
yeah.
didn't find her being pregnant, right? But
No.
that was something that early on I was kind of
Everyone was
wondering.
speculating on that. But They
Yeah.
ruled that out. Yeah.
Or it could just be, it could be as simple as he had this paraphilia of wanting her to be unconscious when he was with her, and strangulation was a part of that. It could be like, as I said earlier, erotic asphyxiation, or maybe he drugged her. There was evidence that he had drugs that he gave to her quite often, sedatives that would put her out, and so that would be a part of that whole type of paraphilia. But yeah, I guess we'll never know for sure. And perhaps that if he went to trial, we would have learned a lot more. But
Rest in peace, Madeline Soto. I concur with her father. Sure she would have been a wonderful
yeah,
woman and come into her own and found some hope living with her father. So it's so sad.
so
It's so
sad.
sad.
And what she went through, yeah, just so sad.
So sad. Thank you. Of course, as we explained at the beginning, this was going to be a difficult conversation, and it was for me. So, but I so appreciate your knowledge in this field. Thank you. Thank you for discussing this sentencing. I know that many have been asking us as we were covering this. We simply couldn't be there on that date. We were covering 3 different trials or sentencings at that time. But we certainly didn't forget Maddie, nor forget that the sentencing happened and been wanting to discuss it. So thank you, babe.
Yeah.
And yeah, we have some other things planned. I know many have been asking for more Dr. John, and he is working on some additional shows. Thank you for your patience. And yeah, we'll see you soon again. I love you.
Okay, I love you too. Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
think it's important that we did discuss this again and try to tie up some loose ends with Stephen Stearns, because a lot of people have reached out and asked, and it just happened to occur at a time that we were inundated with other stuff. So
Right.
I'm glad we finally got to it.
Yeah. And I'm grateful that he will not be able to harm any more children. So, all right. Rest in peace, Maddie.